All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to MMS 2012, and definitely want to thank you for attending this session on Unix and Linux, monitoring with Ops Manager. My name is Chris Bash. I'm a program manager working on Unix and Linux capabilities in Ops Manager. So a couple things I want to cover today. Out of the box, Operations Manager is solid on monitoring your Unix and Linux systems at the operating system level, getting a good base coverage on the OS. But I want to go beyond that and really talk about application monitoring for Unix and Linux. Put this in a little context. If you had a Microsoft SQL server and it was your job to go and monitor that with Ops Manager, it's a pretty simple proposition. You would download and import the Microsoft SQL Management Pack provided by Microsoft, import that, set some overrides to customize thresholds, maybe publish some reports for your DBAs. Completely straightforward. You're probably not going to go look at partner offerings for a Microsoft SQL Management Pack, probably not going to write your own management pack. If we flip that proposition a little bit and say you need to monitor MS or MySQL on Linux or Unix, then you need to look at partner offerings. You need to look at custom management packs. It's not as straightforward. And that's really what I want to explore today is that decision process and what capabilities are there to monitor applications on Unix and Linux systems with Operations Manager. And the key takeaway here is that it's absolutely viable. Operations Manager can definitely monitor your full software stack. And there are a couple ways to get at that, and we'll explore those through some demos and some discussion. In the process of looking at that, we'll show off a number of new features in Ops Manager 2012. The 2012 release of Ops Manager in terms of Unix and Linux support was just feature. We were able to add a whole bunch of features to make it easier to administer your agents, to customize monitoring. We're really happy with this release, really proud of it. So I'm looking forward to showing that off. The LAMP stack that was referenced in the title of this session, if you're not familiar, it's an acronym for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and then Perl, PHP, or even Python, depending on who you ask. It is a common web server stack. I'm using it as an example because it is common, and it provides us a good real-world case to explore application monitoring. Of course, this would apply to Unix as well. Typically, the LAMP stack on Unix is referred to as UAMP. LAMP has a little better ring to it, which is why I put it in the title. So we'll talk about the base OS monitoring, cover some of the new features of Ops Manager 2012, some of the architecture. How many of you have used Ops Manager to monitor Unix and Linux today? Good. How many of you had looked at 2012? All right, great. So we'll get a little background for those of you who are new to Unix and Linux and Ops Manager, and then really highlight the new features in 2012, and then dive into the application monitoring. And in the application monitoring, I'll look at some demos and compare the partner case versus the custom MP authoring case and kind of explore that decision process. Should have plenty of time for questions. Please feel free to interrupt me if you have a question as we're going through. So supported operating systems, our focus is on the Linux and Unix operating systems found in the enterprise data center. This includes AIX, HPUX, and Solaris on the Unix side, and Red Hat Linux and SUSE Linux on the Linux side. We try to get new support for new major versions of the OSs out within 180 days of GA for the operating system. Solaris 11 support is shipping real soon. And then we support the operating system version as long as the vendor does. So Solaris version 8 is out of extended support at this point, and we didn't ship Solaris 8 support in Ops Manager 2012. That's a pretty long support lifespan for Operations Manager agents. As I mentioned, we put a ton of new features in 2012 around Unix and Linux monitoring. Highly available monitoring, sudo elevation, SSH key authentication, new wizards for administration, PowerShell commandlets. We'll cover all these in some demos. We made some performance improvements, really revamped the authoring experience in the console. Those we'll cover in demos. And then we also made a number of other improvements, like a whole new set of reports. We've totally revamped our knowledge content in the MPs. We got a lot of questions. How are you calculating available memory on this platform versus that platform? It's not as straightforward as Windows, where you can just go to perfmon and look at the definition of the counter. So we tried to expose that level of information, the MP knowledge, so all that detailed content is available in the console. And this is an overview for those of you who are new to Ops Manager or Unix and Linux. There's a difference in the agent architecture between the Unix and Linux agent and the Windows agent. The Windows agent's a fully distributed case where the agent has its own health service, it runs its own workflows, pushes data back to the management server. Unix and Linux is what I would consider a hybrid centralized model. We do have a lightweight agent on the Unix and Linux computer. A lot of the post-processing, the actual health service type modules are run on the management server gateway. So there are two protocols that we use for communication between the management server and the Unix and Linux agent. First is SSH, and key point is SSH is only used for administering the agent. Cases where the agent is not up. That would be deploying the agent, uninstalling the agent, starting the agent if it's down, or upgrading the agent. It's the only time we're making an SSH connection to the agent. If you have another system to deploy software to your machines and want to use that as an alternative to the SSH push, that's entirely an option. SSH is never used in monitoring of the Unix and Linux computers. All the monitoring is done over WSMAN. This is a web service protocol. It's a standard desktop management task force controlled protocol, and it really implements you can think of it as implementing the SIM model, the Common Information Model, over SOAP web service. It's very similar to WMI. It's just a cross-platform standard. The agent itself for Unix and Linux is two parts. There's what's called the CIM Object Manager, SIMOM server, and that we use an open source product called OpenPegasus, where we actually contribute some fixes back to the OpenPegasus project. And then we also have a set of providers, and the providers are what do the units of work. They talk to the kernel through kernel APIs, like kstat and perstat. They interrogate status with ioctls. They collect the information from the kernel and expose that back. So OpenPegasus handles the incoming requests, does authentication and authorization, dispatches the request to the providers, which return data. Raw data is returned back to the management server. Management server determines what to do with that, whether to generate an alert or write it to the database. Key new feature in 2012 addressed a major problem, major limitation with Ops Manager 2007 R2, and that was in 2007 R2, the management server was a single point of failure. If you lost a management server, your Unix and Linux agents owned by that management server went dark. So in 2012, there's a new concept called a resource pool. A resource pool is a collection of management servers or gateways. And we've changed the relationship between, so instead of having a relationship between the server and the Unix and Linux agent, you have a relationship between the pool and the Unix and Linux agent. This accomplishes a few things. Most obviously, failover. If you have two or more servers in your management server pool, if you lose one, the workflows get picked up by the other, and they have high availability. It also does load balancing. You no longer have to worry about, am I maxing out this management server? and do I need to manually move agents to this server? It distributes the load between the servers in the pool. And this makes scale out really easy. You add some more agents, you need to add another management server, you just add it into the pool, you have to do some certificate trust configuration, and you have automatic load balancing. So definitely a key new feature in 2012. Our most requested feature from 2007 R2 really came down to concerns around using root users in the discovery and monitoring case. And the root credentials were used for monitoring privilege logs. They were used for deploying the agent and uninstalling and upgrading the agent. For some reason, Unix and Linux admins don't like to give out their root password, particularly to store in a Microsoft database, at least from our experience. So what we've done in 2012 is we've enabled sudo elevation. If you're not familiar with sudo elevation, you can think of it as run as in Windows. It allows a non-privileged user who's been pre-authorized to elevate credentials for particular commands and activities. This allows for both monitoring, like reading syslog messages, and administration, like deploying the agent. Your Unix and Linux admins can configure a sudoers file that grants a low privilege user privileges to elevate for these particular tasks. Key benefits here: one, you don't have to store root, you don't have to give out the root password across IT departments or IT personnel. And two, the Unix and Linux admins own the configuration. They own the authorization on the system. They're not giving a blank check to the ops manager admin. Also, corresponding to this, for the SSH portions of the administration, which is the agent upgrade, agent install, agent uninstall, SSH keys can be used in place of a password that's with or without a passphrase. If a lot of organizations lock down SSH and don't allow password authentication for SSH connections. So for those SSH portions, you can use an SSH key in lieu of a password. One example, sudoers configuration, and I put this up here just to demonstrate the granularity that you can delegate to the Unix and Linux admin. So moving into our LAMP stack, the L in LAMP stands for Linux, which represents the operating system in the stack. So we can talk about what we're doing in terms of operating system monitoring. And this isn't really greatly changed from 2007 R2. We felt like we had a pretty good, the feedback we got from customers, from you, was that we're doing a pretty good job on covering the base OS. Did add a few new things in 2012, like inodes monitoring on file system. We switched over file system free space monitors to 3-state. And did a whole new set of reports that were a little more specific to Linux and Unix. But mostly it's the typical CPU, logical and physical disk, log files, memory and swap, network adapter, process monitoring. So jumping into a demo here, you can have a look at some of these administration and OS monitoring cases. So this is an entirely new discovery wizard for 2012. And one thing you'll notice is that we no longer require you to input credentials for every host you're discovering. You can group hosts and credentials, multiple hosts into a set with credentials, makes the wizard just far more usable. And I will set up a discovery here, if I can type this correctly. This is a whole new credentials dialog. You see I can select SSH keys or username and password. So I'll just do a discovery with a low privilege user with an SSH key. Tell it that I don't have privileged access, which gives me this elevation prompt. Well, We do support su elevation for the administration cases for deploying the agent, uninstalling the agent. This case, I'll use sudo elevation as I've configured that on the system. And because I'm using an SSH key, I need to provide verification credentials for the WSMan portion. When the deployment's complete, obviously the discovery wizard's going to go out over WSMan and check and make sure the agent's responding. That's done over, the WSMan protocol doesn't support SSH keys, so we're just putting this credential in for verification. And you see here, I'm prompted not to select a management server to do the discovery. I'm prompted to select a resource pool. So I've created a resource pool. This discovery should only take a few seconds to go out. It'll determine the operating system, make sure that it has the correct management pack installed, make sure that the correct agent is available. And you can see that it's a /11 server. Simply select it and manage. This will push out the agent, make sure it sign the certificate, make sure that it's responding. And again, for a single system, this should only take a few seconds. And that's a discovery done using sudo elevation with an SSH key. And this will take a little while to go out and actually discover the file systems and processors and things. While we're in the administration space, how many of you who are using 2007 R2 have deployed a CU to your Unix and Linux agents? A cumulative update. Was it painful? Extremely? Yeah. So, in 2012, in 2007 R2, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of deploying a cumulative update, you would have to rerun the discovery wizard and re-input credentials for each host and deploy rediscover, and it would prompt you to upgrade the agent. It was a painful process, something we absolutely had to address in 2012. So now from the administration pane, I can simply launch upgrade agent, select the agents I want to upgrade, and I can again use the run as account credentials that I've pre-configured, or I can go back, and this is again going to support su or sudo elevation, SSH keys, that full set of administrative credentials. I don't have any newer agents on here, so this can't complete the upgrade. It's just a much simpler case. You install the update on your management servers, the new agents are there, you can walk through the wizard in the console using stored credentials and not have to re-input those credentials. And we also have new wizards to change resource pools. If you wanted, you can of course have multiple resource pools and upgrade the agent. Still in the administration space, for 2007 R2, we provided a set of PowerShell scripts that enabled some limited automation capabilities for Unix and Linux agents. In 2012, we've implemented a proper set of PowerShell commandlets that allow you to do anything you can do in the administration pane of the console in PowerShell. So if I wanted to enumerate the agent I just discovered, I could do a quick PowerShell commandlet. Sorry about my typing. And that's the agent, and if I wanted to uninstall it, simply, typing again. Pipe it to uninstall STX agent, and it's uninstalled. And that was by default using the credentials I had stored in the run as account. Yes, question? So the question is around certificate signing in automation, and is PowerShell an option? Yes, you can use PowerShell. That entire discovery wizard that I walked through is available in PowerShell. It's a two-part commandlet. You would invoke the discovery and then install the agent, and all of your options around using sudo and su elevation are available in those commandlets. So definitely, as you can see, the agent was uninstalled. Definitely a lot more flexibility around automation. There are commandlets for upgrades, uninstalls, installs, managing your run as accounts, managing your run as profiles. Particularly if you consider integration with like Orchestrator, you have a whole new set of, a whole new platform for automation. Tabbing over to monitoring, most of you have probably seen this. We have a presentation in the console, should be pretty consistent with your Windows agents. We can see the, I have a number of custom monitors here, but we're monitoring a number of common daemons. We're monitoring some logical disks. And as I mentioned, we did add a whole new set of reports, so I can pull up like the operating system performance analysis, which is one of our new reports that pulls common Unix and Linux performance metrics for the operating system and consolidates them into one report. Should just take a second to load. So again, on the reports, we just tried to make these more specific to Unix and Linux and a little more useful. All right, switch back to our deck. So let's move into the meat of the presentation here and start talking about applications. First thing I want to call out is, out of the box, again, we're providing management packs that have your operating systems covered. You can go in and customize log file monitoring, customize daemon and process monitoring. We have some new shell command templates for customizing monitoring as well. So you should be pretty close to having your OSs covered out of the box. Operations Manager 2012 also has Java Enterprise Edition server monitoring capabilities across Unix, Linux, and Windows. So your JEE platform servers are covered out of the box for a deep level of monitoring. But then you have every other application on Unix and Linux that comes into play. And there are two general approaches that I alluded to. One is going out and acquiring a partner solution. On the other side, you can write your own management pack. Operations Manager is highly extensible. It's really, this is a value proposition. It's a decision process. And I wanted to call out some of the factors that would be involved in this decision. Partner solutions are great for general commercial applications, Oracle, DB2, MySQL, those common applications. If you have a dev team that's writing your own line of business applications, no partner is going to have a solution for my app. That's the case where you're clearly going to be custom authoring. And by custom authoring, I'm referring to both management pack authoring in a la XML and customization through the new templates we have in the console. Partner solutions are great for out-of-the-box functionality. If you need to spin up a deep level of monitoring now, partner solutions don't involve a development process that takes time. They also tend to be good for complex scenarios. If you want to map hierarchical relationships between a table space on a database server and the actual database server itself and have health state roll up, that stuff's, it can take time to implement. Partner solutions are great for that. Vendor support, if you want to have a vendor who can support their monitoring product, again, partners are the way to go. On the flip side, in-house, if your application's developed in-house, that's where the knowledge is. If it's a simple monitoring scenario, you just need to monitor some processes, log files, and maybe run a script. I've talked to a number of customers who have significant investment in shell scripts for their custom applications, and they may have switched monitoring products over the year, but what's stayed the same is that they have these monitoring shell scripts on all their servers, and that's how they know the health of the servers. Definitely a good plug for custom authoring. And sometimes licensing costs can be a concern. Certainly, if you are limited by your capital expenses and need to get some monitoring going now, you can explore custom authoring. So this is the kind of value proposition that I want to explore as we talk about these. And we'll look first at Apache. Apache's if you're not familiar, Apache's a extremely common, pretty straightforward web server. You can think of it as being the equivalent of IIS for the rest of the world. If we wanted to, Apache's pretty simple. There aren't that many surfaces to monitor in it to get the basic health state. What I'm going to propose for a custom MP that we'll explore in a demo is that we can do this all through templates in the console to get a basic health assessment of our Apache server. We'll monitor the process status, set up a log file rule, and then there's a performance API through Apache that's exposed as a web page if you load the server status module, and we'll use some shell commands to get some performance metrics out of that. Pretty straightforward, pretty lightweight, gives us a basic sense of health for an Apache server. Now, if we wanted to go deeper on Apache, and it was a much more mission-critical server, we had more robust monitoring requirements. Well, one example partner solution that we will demo is the Bridgeways management pack for Apache. Excuse me. This does deeper monitoring. It actually looks at log file sizes and pulls maps the relationship between websites and servers, and it just has a lot more out-of-the-box capabilities, including reports and configuration collection. So it's it's definitely adding more value than what I'm proposing for the simple custom case. So let's look at this in a demo. So for the custom case, I created a few groups. Created a MySQL servers group and a web servers group. The web servers are my Apache servers. And the first thing I want to monitor for Apache is the actual process, the HTTPD. This is an all-new process monitoring wizard for 2012. So I can create a new process monitor. And if I knew everything I needed to know here, I could just type this in, target a group, and be done. But if I want to explore the actual process name that's running on a system, I can connect to one of my agents, look for HTTPD. This is running with a pre-fork. And it lists all the instances of that process. I want to take a quick detour here to show a really cool new feature. I know we're talking about monitoring Apache, but let's say we were talking about monitoring WebSphere or a Java process. And one thing we hear from a lot of customers with a concern about the previous service monitoring template in 2007 R2 was, I've got 100 processes named Java. Everyone's a different app. How do I tell them apart because they're all named Java? This is in 2012. What we did was add a filter so that you can use a regular expression against the process arguments to identify which process maps to which application. So in this server, I have a WebSphere and a Tomcat Java process running. If I wanted to create an alert that tells me that Tomcat's down, I could simply come in and put in a regular expression, Tomcat, and it's only going to match that one process or any process that matches that regular expression in the arguments. Just simply taking all the arguments for the process, concatenating them into a string, and then using a regular expression to post-filter that. So it's a combination of monitoring by process name and then regular expression evaluated against the process arguments. But we'll flip back to HTTPD. And I'll target my Linux web servers group. Remove the regular expression. And now I can set a minimum and maximum threshold. My Apache configuration on this server, the server comp sets a minimum and maximum target for HTTP worker processes of between 5 and 25. If I have less than 5 or more than 25, something is wrong. The server is overloaded if there are too many, or processes have died if there are too few. So I can set a minimum maximum threshold. And once this saves, we have process monitoring for our Apache servers, the members of that group. Log file monitoring is quite similar. This is very similar to the log file monitoring wizard that was in 2007 R2. We added a few new capabilities in terms of setting alert severity and selecting whether you want to run with privilege or non-privilege. Just waiting for my console to catch up here. So I can go through the same wizard entry point and set an Apache errors rule. Target the same group. Actually have my strings here. Point it to the Apache error log. Input my regular expression for detecting errors. And I want to, this is a warning, this is a non-privileged log. So I can run with the action account. And that sets log file monitoring. Again, very similar to 2007 R2, a few more options there. So I did mention that Apache has a API that's implemented as a web page that gives us some performance stats. So I can use a CURL, which is like a command line web client on a Linux system if I wanted to enumerate that page. And we can see the symbol command using the script mode to connect to the server status API. I can see CPU load, uptime, requests per second, bytes per second. So if I wanted to say, track requests per second, collect that as a performance rule, I could simply modify my shell command to make it a formatted one-liner by doing a grep to get requests per second, send that over to awk to print just the second column. And this command now tells me whenever I run this command, it's going to give me the numeric value for requests per second for the local Apache instance running at localhost. This is an entirely new feature of Ops Manager 2012. I can take a command like this, go into rules, create a new rule, create a new Unix Linux shell command performance rule. I'm going to disable this by default, target the Linux computer class. Give it a name. So I'm going to collect this every 5 minutes. And simply drop that command into the shell command dialog. This is non-privileged, so I don't have to, so I can go with the action account. This filter expression is just, performance data has to be numeric, this default filter expression, and for this template is just validating with the regular expression that it's numeric and that the command succeeded. And I can map this to performance data by giving it an object. And the XPath is pre-populated for the value. And that creates a performance rule that's going to run that command that I just demoed in the PuTTY session and collect that as performance data. Because I targeted Linux computer, I need to, this should be disabled and then override for the group. I think yeah. Just enable it for the web servers group. So what you can, this shell command wizard I just showed was one of several we added. These take the commands you can put in there, as I used there, can be a one-liner where you're using like grep, awk, and sed to format data. You can call an existing script on the file system. You can run a command on the file system. Doesn't allow you to take a large script and paste it in there. If you have a complex script, recommendation is to push that out to the file system and call it from the path. I've set up a few of these for Apache and also started on a dashboard. How many of you have played around with dashboards in 2012? So a lot more flexibility with what you can do in terms of presentation in the console. This is a dashboard I started to create that has some of the other metrics that I'm collecting. So if I wanted to add a new performance rule or performance data point into this, say add the idle workers metric that I've set up previously. Target that to the group, select the performance counter. And these are the, some of these are actually all collecting from shell command rules. And add that widget to the dashboard. So, I think I have about 4 or 5 shell command performance collection rules here. Once you have those commands, if you know those commands, setting up the process monitor, the log file monitor, the dashboard, there's 4 or 5 shell command rules, maybe throw in a few tasks. That's like half an hour to get this basic health and performance capture for Apache. If you've tried to do something similar in 2007 R2, this is a paradigm shift for Unix and Linux. It's massively easier. But there's also the case for partner MPs. And in this example, I have a Bridgeway's Apache MP loaded up. It's discovered my Apache servers and websites. I can see some of these same performance metrics on busy workers and idle workers. I have can run a configuration change report. This is just a lot more there's just a lot more content provided in this partner solution. There's, again, as I mentioned previously, a mapping of websites to servers. If you have multiple websites running under one server, or more robust tasks. So again, if it's this value proposition for your Apache servers. If you have 1,000 Apache servers and you just want to know, is it up? Is it responding? Are the processes running? What logs of errors do we have? It may be a good case for just rolling out a custom MP. If you have some mission critical boxes that you really need some deep and intensive performance analysis, and you need full set of performance metrics that you don't want to just script out everyone, then the partner solution is a good proposition. So 2 ways to get at the same problem. Different circumstances drive that decision. So again, we can look at similar case in MySQL, and the value proposition starts to change a little bit. Again, with MySQL, we can do some log file monitoring, we can do some process monitoring, we can do all sorts of fun stuff with shell commands, including connecting to if we set it up, we can connect to the database and actually run some SQL queries to get data out of MySQL. Say enumerating slow queries with a show status command. And then on the flip side, with the partner MP, there's, again, just a greater level of depth. They're discovering databases and tables and mapping the relationship between them and adding reports and configuration collection and connection activity monitoring. So the custom MP I'm proposing is a pretty simple, my MySQL server's up, it's got some basic performance health, and whereas the partner solution's going in with a lot more depth, a lot more knowledge built in. Let's have a look at that and look at a few more templates while we're here. So like the shell command performance rule template, we also have monitor capabilities. So I can come in and create a unit monitor. Create a Unix Linux shell command 2-state monitor. Before we get into that, let's have a look at what we can do on MySQL. So if I want to check that MySQL listens by default on port 3306. So if I do a netstat an, go 3306, I get a list of listening ports, and grep that again for listen, and tell me that it, that port 3306 is listening on the local box. And my all-time favorite shell command is wc-l, which gives us a line count. So if I stop MySQL and run the same netstat pipe to wc-l, I get a 0. And if I start MySQL and run the same command, I get a 1. 0's down, 1's up. It doesn't get any simpler than that. So I'll create a MySQL port listening, port listener. I guess it should be listener port. Monitor. Target Linux computer. Disable it by default. Run it every 5 minutes. Paste my command in. Again, this is non-privileged. I'm just running a netstat. And now I set my health evaluation. So standard out, error, this is the error expression. So again, if I get a 0 back from standard out, the port's down. So simply put in a standard out equals 0. And if standard out equals 1, I'm healthy. And this is, consider this a critical. I can generate an alert. I think typed out my string earlier. And I can use the actual, the properties of the target, like the computer name. I can get standard out from the command using a $data variable in the alert description and create that alert. So I'll go ahead and stop MySQL. In one of these boxes. Well, I override the monitor to enable it for the group. So what should happen is I've set up a few other monitors that do a MySQL connection status. We'll see some alerts here in a minute. Yes, question?
You said that the template, the regular expression has to be a numerical value. How difficult will it be to be a string equivalent for a string?
I'm sorry, the regular expression in the process monitoring template? Oh, so the monitor, so the question is using a regular expression in the filter expression that sets the error and health state of the monitor. So that's the operators available there are contains, equals, matches regular expression, the typical expression filter content. Yeah, exactly. You can simply do a contains error. So this is a good case. You have a script that returns OK or error, and you just simply go in and say if it contains error, it's unhealthy, and if it contains OK, it's healthy. Yes, the numerical value is only when you're collecting performance data. So the first, on the Apache example, it was collecting a performance metric, and the database enforces that that's a numeric value. So in monitors, you can use any form of comparison there.
Talking about the differences of the agents, Windows agents versus the Linux agents, and how they actually work. Can you talk about the performance impact of the Linux agent? Does it have the CPU throttling mechanisms, data providers, like Windows agents have?
And so the question is, stepping back to the architecture between Windows and Linux, and take a little diversion here while we wait for these alerts to generate, and around performance throttling and performance impact on the agent. The Unix and Linux agent is very lightweight. That's the bulk of the processing work is actually on the management server. So the CPU impact on the Unix and Linux agent is very minimal. It's doing some simple kernel API calls. It's caching values so that when it's enumerated by the management server, it's returning values from a cache. So it's a highly performance optimized, low impact agent on the Unix and Linux system. So the question is, if you have a custom script that, due to a problem, races CPU on the Unix and Linux agent, will the agent throttle that? No, it will not. It will hit a timeout at some point and terminate at that point. But there is no when it dispatches, when we're creating these rules and monitors, there are dispatching commands. It does not throttle the CPU. General recommendation when you're using commands and scripts to drive these monitors, you want them to be quick executing, return pretty simple to parse values. We'll talk about how you handle complex output a little later in the session. If you have long-running scripts that do a lot of processing. There are ways of running those on a cron job or some other, or scheduling them as a rule, as a background process, and then coming back and picking up the output with the monitor, so that the ruler monitor is just getting the values quickly and processing them. It's not a great fit for really complex, long-running scripts.
Follow on the answers, management servers doing the work. I read like for Windows agents, you have like 1,200 per management servers, number of them. What would one expect for like Unix agents?
Yeah.
I assume would be
Yeah, number of agents per management server. Guidelines for Unix and Linux is 500 agents per server. Keep in mind that in a pool failover situation, So now our alerts have come in. Thanks for filling the dead air. And we can see some of these are actually from the Bridgeways MPs, but we can see the MySQL connection status, which is a shell command monitor that I created before I started, is showing the error connecting to the MySQL server. And the listener port status alert that we just created is also came in. Now, I have a couple monitors in there that have some overlap. Typically, if your daemon is down, your port's going to be down as well. So we could roll those up into an aggregate monitor and actually just generate the alert off the aggregate monitor rather than each individual monitor. But now that MySQL's down, if I don't want my operations team who are in the Ops Manager console to have to go out and open a SSH session, I can come in and create an agent task with a shell command and call it start MySQL. Type in service MySQL start. Make it viable for Linux computers. Oops, I guess I should put the shell command. This is privileged, so we need to use our privileged account. That's all it takes to create a task that we can execute from the console using a shell command. And now for this server that's down, we'll tab back to the monitoring view and use our new task to start MySQL. And again, this is a dashboard that I created that's looking at the percent available memories coming out of the Linux operating system management pack, but it's relevant to this view, so I brought that widget in. Connected threads and slow queries are being collected, in this case, by shell commands, performance rules. And now I have a task to start MySQL. I use my run as credentials. And if I type this correctly, this will start the MySQL daemon. The question is, how do you do availability reporting out of those custom monitors? So in this case, these templates are targeted against the computer. It'll roll up into the computer availability. For the performance metrics, you could go into the generic report library and select those performance counters and generate reports using the generic report library in Ops Manager. Yes, and Nick.
For auditing purposes, when you provide the operator tasks to do, instead of using a built-in run as account, can they be prompted for Unix credentials and then use those into a built-in account?
Not unless you, yeah. The question was, can you restrict those can you restrict the use of run as accounts in these tasks? And the answer is no, not in the console. All right, so that should start MySQL, and we'll move back to, let's look at what the partner offering for MySQL is. Again, I'm looking at the Bridgeways MP, and key point I want to make here is that partner offering is going a lot deeper. It's doing, it's enumerating tables and putting monitors against the actual table spaces, looking more at log data, cache hit ratios. You know, a lot of this stuff you could get to with shell commands and scripts, but you know, at a certain point, if you need this kind of depth of monitoring, it makes a lot of sense to look for something out of the box that's covering this with built-in knowledge. See that we're actually just, the Bridgeways MP is discovering the table state and the index state, and actually we can see this really well if we come in to the server and kick off a diagram view. And we can see the, you know, this hierarchical relationship mapping. Well, that's not something that's easy. You can't get to that kind of MP authoring through the operations console. So my general rule here is the more robust your monitoring requirements are, the more specific your monitoring requirements are, the more complex the application. You know, that really drives the decision towards a partner offering. There's simple cases. There's, you know, we just need some basic health, some basic performance. You know, it's so easy now in the console to just fire off some rules and monitors. You know, that it's so for those cases, I would look at the custom offering, the custom approach. And then just to complete the LAMP stack, PHP and Perl. You know, we can. I think this is valuable in cases where you want to do some basic checking of your actual web app. Using CURL, you can do some pretty simple commands to check against your web server and make sure that the HTTP response code is what you expect. Make sure that a certain string is present in the content. And this is really, I think this is ideal when you have a large number of web servers serving in a web farm, and you just want to know, is there a problem with this thing returning the pages it's supposed to? You don't need robust transaction monitoring against each individual server in this web farm. Maybe you have that user experience monitoring against the public-facing URL, but you want to know each server, you know, I want it to go red if it's not working and the load balancer is abstracting that away from the user. So we can, you know, very easily do this again with the shell command monitor. And I won't actually walk through the full wizards again, but if I show you what we can do with some of the CRL stuff. So I have a PHP page that's actually reading a list of users from a database and then returning them on a web page. So if I use CRL, I can see the actual HTML that's returned. And if I want to see just the HTTP response code, I can get the, you know, do a little formatting on CURL. So now I'm getting a response code of 200. I could easily go in and create a monitor that says, you know, go to a warning if it's anything over 400, and go to critical if it's anything over 500, or I can say, if it's not 200, give me an error. And same thing with, you know, with the content check, we can enumerate the content and then simply grep it for a title. Pipe that to WC-L, and that gives us a numeric value. If we have anything, you know, if we have a 0 in this case, we're not getting the content that we expected. That's the question.
Now, in reference to this just seems like a web monitor in itself that we use with scamming. Is this just another option?
So your question is about going to the going in the web monitor wizard, and yeah. So yeah, there's there's a slight difference here one, that's a centralized monitor. That's going, you're selecting your watcher nodes, and they're watching these web cases. And that's a great way to do it. And that's, it definitely gives you a perspective on more of a user experience, and you can check, is this website available from here? It's a much more robust way to do it as well. You can get, load times on different transactions. And this is more of a simple case, like, that's distributed out to the agent. Just, I want to know if this host is responding on this website.
One server farm, because you have to, in the web application, you have to figure out, build individual ones.
Yeah, to your point, my illustration is that this would be more of, I've got a bunch of these things in a farm. I don't want to target every single one of them with a web transaction monitor that's simulating user experience. I just want a simple, is it up, is it down? And then I'll build like a web transaction monitor that's doing the user experience simulation that's maybe going against the public-facing side of that. So certainly there's a little, there's some overlap there, but this is just and it's also completing out this, this notion that you can monitor the entire LAMP stack using rules and monitors that you built directly in the ops console. So for those of you who have done some MP authoring in the past, what I've been showing today is, in these templates, is a new set of features we did for 2012. And our goal was to get the really common customizations into the console, not make you edit XML to do some basic custom rule and monitors. We wanted to really hit those common scenarios and make it as simple to use as possible. But it doesn't cover all of the extensibility capabilities of Ops Manager. Certainly, if you do want to do things like dynamically discover applications based on the presence of a file or the contents of a file, you want to hierarchically discover components of an application with a relationship to a parent, and then target those individual subcomponents. Those are things you would need to do in the classic authoring, outside of the operations console. Also, one thing that comes up, we talked to a number of customers about, is parsing complex output. Your command or your script that gives you status on an application or subsystem is kicking out a big XML file, and you want to parse that because you can use that to drive multiple rules and monitors. Well, that you can do with, use one of the WSMan invoke modules in a custom MP, and then follow that with a PowerShell module and parse that XML and turn that into a property bag and do all this awesome stuff. But that's not going to be, you're not going to be able to do that in the ops console. That's in what I'm calling the classic authoring experience. So more extensibility, more effort, more learning curve. The authoring templates in the console are great for the simple cases, the simple standard out, standard error type evaluations, just the really common, we need to get, it's a very basic scenario. Hopefully that addresses a lot of the scenarios though. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Does the Visio management pack piece include the Linux templates in the design, or?
Not yet. We are working on that. The question was about the Visio MP authoring tool and whether it has the Unix and Linux authoring capabilities. So again, multiple ways to approach it, but absolutely, we strongly feel that Ops Manager can fully monitor your complete software stack. Also, if you didn't notice, Ops Manager 2012 is awesome in terms of Unix and Linux monitoring. So I have a few resources. My blog, I cover a lot of authoring scenarios, both in the console and in XML. A few other team blogs. And the TechNet Wiki, we started putting some of our, started moving some of our documentation to the TechNet Wiki around like sudo configurations and We also put up a discovery troubleshooting guide that should cover all discovery errors that you might encounter and what the recommended steps are for troubleshooting them. We thought the wiki format would be good for that. Yep. I'm sorry, with yes. Question is about AIX. Our approach with AIX, HPUX, Solaris, and the Linuxes is once you get above the agent, that's all the same. It should be completely common. We try to implement a common model. I have a couple more slides, but yes, question? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. The AIX. Oh, so using error report on AIX. For AIX, syslog monitoring, we actually, in order to implement that common set of monitoring, we require that you set up syslog writing to a message file to monitor for things like failed SUs and failed root logins and things like that. I did want to just quickly jump topics. There's a team at Microsoft called the Open Solutions Group that we work closely with, and what they do is they build on the Unix and Linux capabilities in System Center and engage partners and try to build more complete solutions for heterogeneous environments. They have a booth in the Microsoft Pavilion. As you're going in, it's on the left-hand side. Definitely recommend checking out what they're doing. They have a couple of cool things going on with SUSE now, if you're running SUSE Linux. One that I just wanted to quickly touch on was SUSE Manager, which is a patch manager for Linux systems, including SLES, Red Hat, and CentOS. Open Solutions Group worked with SUSE, and SUSE has a manager plugin for SUSE Manager to integrate with Ops Manager so that you're monitoring your patch management, controlling your patch management to your Linux systems. It's a nice integration between SUSE Manager and Ops Manager. I believe they have a demo of this in the booth. And likewise, they've also done some integration with SUSE Studio, which lets you build customized distro images, with Orchestrator to automate deployment of highly customized Linux images to public cloud and private cloud hosts. So I definitely recommend having a talk with them. It's a team we work with quite closely. So should have a little bit of time for questions. Yep.
One of the problems I ran into with process monitoring is with processes that's on child processes that may have the same name, then the child process will close and then I'll get an alert based on the child process. Is there a way to have that?
So the question is process spawning child processes with the same name, and in 2007 R2, you should only get an alert if none of the processes matching that name exist. So in 2012, you can probably use a range. So do you want an alert if none of them are running? Yeah, so you should be able to use a range. That's new. We used to, there was no flexibility in 2007 R2 around the range of processes. And depending on the arguments to the process, in 2012, you could filter out the child. If the child processes have different arguments to them, you could filter them out. But I'd be glad to talk more about that with you after the session. Yes?
Question about the log file monitoring. We tried to use it in the past, and we had a problem with, it's like the application was erasing the file every day, but the log file has to be a continuous log file. And we talked with Microsoft, they said it was a known problem, they were working on it, and you just said that in 2012, the log monitoring is the same as 2007
So the question was around log file monitoring and handling log files that are purged every day. So the log file provider evaluates a few things when it's looking at a log file. It keeps a track of where it currently is in the file. But if the file size is smaller than it was previously, it should assume that it's a new file and start from the beginning. If the inode changes or the modification date changes, it should pick that up. So when did you have this issue? Because that should not be the behavior that it's.
Well, I would say last year. Well, we started to work with the cross-platform about 2 years ago. So it's a long time we haven't touched it, but we kind of give it up on it.
Mm-hmm.
So was wondering.
Yeah, so if the log file is clearing every day and the size on one iteration is smaller than the size on the previous iteration, it should treat it as a new file. That's the behavior by design. So, we can talk more about how we can validate that in your case.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Are there PowerShell commands that enable and disable logging of reviews, possibly remotely view the log file?
The question is, there PowerShell commandlets to control logging on the agents? No. They're not. It still has to be done. You could use like putty PSCP and write a little script and then add it as a task or something like that. Yes? Can you define custom attributes from within the console? No. Can you do it in a custom management pack that you develop in XML or using the new authoring tools or the authoring console? Yes. So, oh yeah, in the back.
Are there any plans on expanding operating system supported, specifically like
I was waiting for this. We get hit with this all the time. So we absolutely know that the customers want it. I can say we're considering it. We're factoring it in. I don't have anything to say on that at this point, though.
Is that the same for BSD or Apple?
So it's funny. I've always been surprised how rarely BSD comes up. I've always assumed it would be one of the ones we hear about often, but I've always just been shocked that we don't hear about BSD quite frequently. But I'll take a note of it.
Well,
Thank you.
just with the Apple file services, they're BSD based, it's starting to become more prevalent, especially people with desktops, for example, laptops.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I've heard rumors about Canonical in retro.
I haven't met them. They haven't talked to me, so. Rumors about Canonical, makers of Ubuntu, being in Redmond. I said, yeah, they've not called me yet, so yes.
If you wanted to do performance monitoring on network package drop per second, what would be your recommendation on how to do that?
SNMP. The question is, how do you performance monitor a network packets per second drop? I would obviously just load the NetSNMP agent and discover the device also as a network device. And the network monitoring capabilities of Ops Manager 2012 will get your standard MIB2 metrics like that. So you can definitely treat a Unix or Linux computer as an SNMP device as well and pull that network type capabilities up.
Glad you got into that, because that's what you've been doing with the SNMP kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
One of the challenges is, well, in the old days, we used to be able to set a community string and have a very simple rule that we just watch built-in summing traps.
For traps.
Mm-hmm.
So the SNMP trap behavior in 2012 should be the same. There should be.
Yeah, and that's what's strange. I'll do like pretty much all, putting like a wall, either blanks for wildcards or asterisks for wildcards.
Yeah. Did you do an upgrade? No. Okay, because the base class for yeah. I would try the forums, just the TechNet forums.